Sustain 267.
Good morning, Botswana. Good morning to my lovely listeners on Warona FM. Thank you for having me. We come back. This is the Sustain 267 feature that happens every Wednesday right here on Warona FM at 9:40 a.m. And I am your host, Nicole Rambe. Today, we're exploring a little bit of a touchy subject in a lot of people's lives, I think in Botswana at large. We're exploring the dangerous link between corruption, public funds, and our ability to survive climate change. With the droughts intensifying, water scarcity rising, and land degradation threatening our farms and livelihoods, how we manage money meant for climate projects and environmental protection it's really just become national survival at this point. With me, I'm not alone. I am pleased to be joined by the criminologist and youth advocate, Warona George. Oh, that name just rolls off the tongue, guys. Wow. An expert who brings sharp analysis on how corruption undermines development and governance. Warona, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, and hello, everybody listening from wherever you are.
Of course, let's jump right into it. So, the National Forensic Audit Summary report recently came out and it flagged several high value contracts. Many of these appear linked to infrastructure, water, and environmental projects. So, from a climate and sustainability perspective, how concerning is it when public funds that are meant for projects such as climate adaptation, renewable energy, or conservation are potentially misused?
Well, it is very concerning, and I think it's very important the work that you guys at Sustain 267 are doing and talking about, in this pocket in terms of climate change and climate resilience. How are we being affected by, when the forensic audit says that they have predicted or they've estimated that we've lost minimum 33 billion bula because of inefficiencies and inadequacies and corruption in the public sector. So it's very important to know that all the money that is lost or that is not going towards the projects that's meant to, the initiatives, to paying people, is a loss in actual results. So when we talk about different climate plans that the country has, for example, the development of the nationally determined contribution of how much as Botswana we are saying that we are going to contribute to invest in climate resilience and climate change initiatives that help us be more climate resilient. When we look at that figure, then you can already estimate that there's a portion of that money that was dedicated towards working towards climate resilience. And that means that through the government processes and through the system that has been existing, we can also attribute that some of the lag or some of the things that are not happening, or the fact that even climate change as a topic, Botswana, is not as prevalent and we don't, advocate for it enough, is also due to some of these inefficiencies and some of the corruption that has happened.
Mm. Thank you so much for flagging 33 billion. Guys, we're not talking about millions here. We're talking about billions. That is a lot. So, wow, if you haven't already read the summary, for those that are listening, please do give it a read. Um, I think it's a very important read to just have at the back of your knowledge bank. So that was in your view as that was from a climate perspective, rather. In your view as a criminologist, right? How does corruption and poor procurement governance worsen our country's climate resilience? And also in your previous answer, you mentioned how these are things that are happening now, but climate is not something it's not a one-time fix, or it's not something that happens now and our future generations don't feel it. What are the long-term risks that this all creates for the future generations?
I think corruption in general, it breeds mistrust between the people, the public, and our governance systems, right? But not only that, it also breeds mistrust from people internationally and potential investors. So if we look at it, let's say from the international lens first, corruption is a red flag for people who want to invest in the country. They do check these things. They check our governance systems. And if they're not up to par, we are losing potential investment in climate resilience and in climate change initiatives that could come from outside and help us create or help us spark and move sustainable development towards a climate resilient country. So corruption is a big red flag for investors. And then locally, corruption becomes a way of life. Unfortunately, we become used to inefficient systems. We become used to creating workarounds so that I know that if I go to a certain ministry and I want my omang to come out fast, I know to buy the officer a cool drink. These things trickle
Mhm.
down. So that means that I can't put trust in the system as it is. And therefore, I either have the privilege to make it work for me, or I am disadvantaged in that it will not work for me, and I have to just succumb to the inefficiencies. So corruption is a big bleeding leak that we have in this country that is only going to grow if we don't have something like the forensic audit that was done to then open our eyes to what's been going on, and then hopefully ignite real sustainable changes in the governance and the structures that we have in the country.
So speaking of the international investments that you were speaking to, Brett, what practical reforms in public procurement and oversight would you recommend to better protect climate funds? Because climate funds, there's a project that's going on right now where a study was done on how much Botswana actually trusts, for instance, the companies that handle climate funds. And
Mhm.
the number was pretty shocking. It was less than 14% actually trust because it's just corruption. Everywhere you think a company is getting money to do good, it's corruption. So, what practical reforms in public procurement and oversight would you recommend to better protect climate funds themselves and sustainability projects from the area?
Hi, are you still able to hear me? Have we lost you, Nicole?
Did we lose you for a second?
Yeah, it just went out, so I couldn't hear you, and I don't think you could hear me.
We can hear you now. We're back on air.
Okay, great. Um, I think the first thing, especially specifically towards climate resilience, number one, I think Botswana need to be educated more on what climate change looks like, what climate resilience looks like for us, and what we would want. I think we put a lot of focus on our abilities or our capabilities in solar power, which is good, and there's only one avenue. And I think the recent floods that happened a year or two ago, made us open our eyes to understand that wow, this climate change is really affecting our lives day to day, and seeing agriculture, the way the shifts in weather are happening that affects the produce that we have in stores. I think Botswana are becoming more aware of what climate change really means, and what we actually need, and why we need to tackle climate change, and why it is important that we hold our governance structures accountable to it, because it really does affect our daily lives. I think before we used to think of it as fossil fuels and something happening in Europe or in America, but we are now seeing the effects that if we don't care about climate change, it is affecting our daily lives. And then number two, in terms of, what better governance and mechanisms that can be out there, I think the first thing is that in Botswana, we lack a traceable paper trail. You can go to a government office, you can submit, firstly, they'll ask you to print a document, which is already susceptible to losing it. You'll go next week or the week after, they can't find it. Systems are not speaking to each other between ministries or even within one ministry. So we don't have a proper data collection and storing mechanism within the ministries and between the ministries. So I already operate in a way that I'm whatever government office I go with more than one copy, because as a citizen now, I have to make up for the inadequacies of our systems, right? So I think
Mm.
that's the one in terms of, government governance and accountability, that there's nothing that I can trace to ensure that I have asked for this one thing, and then it is in this process, and this is how far we are. We also don't have accountability in terms of deadlines. We have allowed a system that, this week your man can take 2 weeks to 3 weeks. Next month they can tell you to come back in 6 months. And there's no repercussions for that. They'll just tell you, oh, system me down. and we that happens and we allow it. People are not getting driver's license. Now you're allowed to go around with a piece of paper that says that you tried to apply but they can't issue it. So we have also become complacent in being that, okay, when the government can't do something, it was just like, oh, retiring, and we accept and we keep it moving, when these are actual real structural governance issues that if they are not fixed, we're going to lose a lot more money.
That is so true. Just recently, there's a ministry. Okay, let me not make it personal, but I've seen a lot of situations in which, for example, you go to a ministry, you ask for something, and then we come back the next week or the week after, and you're told we don't know what you're talking about because
Mm,
there's no tracing of anything. Then you have to start the whole process again, and it's like,
again,
guys, not only am I here every week, this is becoming a little bit
with no
exhausting.
resources. Mm-hmm.
Imagine. But wow, thank you so much for that. Finally, unfortunately, in the interest of time, what call to action would you like to give our listeners that are listening today, especially the young people, on how they can play a role in demanding better accountability? Because that is something that we're flagging is very important. Better accountability for climate funds and pushing for stronger environmental governance in general in our country.
Mm. Yeah, I love that question. I think as young people, we have to know the players involved. And like, I think in this day and age, we are very lucky that we are in a digital age. And I think even our own government and a lot of organizations are realizing the importance of visibility and being online. So nowadays, it is quite easy to search up who is doing what in Botswana, right? It's if you go on
Mhm.
LinkedIn, you even use AI, you can literally search like what climate projects are going on, what's happening, and you can get that information quite easily. So it's important to know who's doing what and where. And
Mhm.
for example, right now there are workshops being held that are working on the nationally determined contribution for Botswana. So what are we contributing towards reducing carbon emissions, right? And greenhouse
Mhm.
gas. That is being developed as we speak. We can find out from those companies that are involved in those organizations and that ministry, which is the Ministry of Environment and Tourism, how many young people are in that room as you guys are developing, which organizations are being represented, and are young people being meaningfully engaged in that process to say what are our priorities for our future and what do we want to commit to as young people? What do we want to see the people in power commit to now? Because it's going to affect us in the long run. So we need to know who's in the room, what people are doing. And given that we're more online now, we are able to go and ask those questions and find out. So my call to action is young people, let's stop waiting to get involved. We must demand it from the beginning to the end. If there's a question you have, if you're sitting at home and you are irritated, that, for example, the example you made of you go and hand in a letter at a ministry and you come back the next week and something is the same letter is nowhere to be found and you have to start again. Demand accountability. It is our
Yes, 100.
responsibility.
100%. Thank you so much, Warana. Those were powerful words, and I really hope our listeners take it into account, especially the youth. The country needs our voices. Demand transparency, ask the hard questions, get involved in holding institutions accountable, whether through advocacy, community oversight, education, or simply refusing to normalize corruption, which unfortunately is what we're doing now. But you heard it here, folks. Please take that into account. Warana, again, thank you so much for being with us. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
You can find me on my LinkedIn, Warona George, or you can email me at warona.george@gmail.com.
If you want to get in touch with me personally, it is Nicole Rumba on LinkedIn. I'm most responsive on there. If you want to get in touch with anyone on the Sustain 267 team, we're on X, Instagram, Facebook. We have a podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We have a YouTube channel where a lot of these recordings go as well. In case you missed the last few episodes, thank you for coming once again. Lerato, thank you for having us once again. And goodbye to you and your listeners. See you next week.